Yes, cookies are good with milk. Now, let's talk about the Meech Lake Accord. Here we have Brian Mulrooney. Thank you very much, Prime Minister Brian Mulrooney, for being here with us today. And now, could you briefly describe to us what the Meech Lake Accord is? You don't need to clap every time. Thank you very much. Well, in the year 1981, the Quebec government refused to accept the constitutional change proposed by me, Brian Mulrooney. However, Quebec proposed a couple of changes which, if accepted, would lead to Quebec endorsing the Constitution. These proposed reforms became known as the Meech Lake Constitutional Accord. Thank you very much. Could you be a bit more specific on the matter? Certainly. The Meech Lake Accord was a set of failed constitutional amendments to the Constitution of Canada, proposed by me, Prime Minister Brian Mulrooney, and Robert Bourassa, Premier of Quebec. It was designed to induce Quebec to accept the Canada Act. Canada wanted Quebec to sign the Constitution, so constitutional negotiations were used to try to persuade Quebec. Quebec proposed two changes in exchange for Quebec's signature on the Constitution. Quebec demanded to be named a distinct society through the Constitution, and to gain more power as a province on the federal level. The accord also stated that the provinces would play a role in the Supreme Court and Senate nominations. It also called for a mandatory First Ministers' Conference to discuss certain points. Thank you. Could you describe to us now what other provinces felt about what Quebec was doing and the kinds of negotiations that they were trying to make? Well, another point that was really important to Quebec was that if a province decided not to endorse or participate in a national program, that the province would be financially compensated. Now, what that means is, if let's say Quebec didn't want to participate in some military actions, why would they have to pay taxes for those events? They should be financially compensated for those kinds of things, because they're not participating in them. And now certain groups, they decided that since they were not really included in these negotiations, they were really upset. They wanted the accord to be rejected because they felt kind of left out. Despite this upset, most of the provincial legislatures accepted the accord. Only Manitoba and Newfoundland remained to accept the accord. In Manitoba's case, unless it obtained the unanimous approval of all of its members of the Parliament, public hearings would be required. On June 23, 1990, the deadline for signing the accord, Elijah Harper, a native member of Parliament, refused to give his approval. The federal government then offered to push back the deadline, but this would force Quebec to ratify the document once more. This situation annoyed Clyde Wells, Premier of Newfoundland, and he refused to have his Parliament vote on the accord. This signified the death of the Meech Lake Accord. Now, if you could please explain, what were the public's views on the topic? Well, the public was generally disappointed with what was happening with the Constitution. Since the Charter of Rights and Freedoms was entrenched in the Constitution, Canadians felt more ownership in it. They no longer accepted any more change behind their backs, because it was against how they believed the reforms should unfold. Could you describe the whole process of how the Meech Lake Accord got rejected and how it didn't come into effect? In order for the accord to be passed, all provinces would have to unanimously agree and support it within 3 years from its introduction. However, Manitoba, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland were three provinces that contributed to the fate of the Meech Lake Accord. First, in New Brunswick, the Liberal leader Frank McKenna took all seats in the legislature through a majority government in New Brunswick. He would not ratify the agreement without some changes. A little later, the Conservatives won a majority government in Manitoba, with the Liberal leaders being opposed to the accord. In Newfoundland, the Liberals obtained a majority government, led by Premier Clyde Wells. The Newfoundland legislature ratified the accord. However, during the election campaign, Premier Wells held a vote so that Newfoundland would no longer support the accord. There were attempts to change the Meech Lake Accord. However, the Quebec National Assembly passed a motion which would reject any reforms to the Meech Lake Accord. Soon after, Newfoundland signed its ratification of the Meech Lake Accord. On June 20th, 1990, Premier Gary Filmon introduced the accord in the Manitoba legislature. However, there was not enough time to ratify the accord without holding public hearings. While these requirements could be avoided with unanimous support from all members of the legislature, Aboriginal MLA Elijah Harper refused to support this ratification. I tried to prolong the due date. However, I first wanted the Newfoundland government to ratify the accord. Feeling pressured, Premier Wells cancelled a scheduled vote on the accord, killing it altogether. Well, on behalf of my crew and myself, we thank you for being here with us today, Prime Minister.